Welcome back, film fans. This is going to be a review of a film that I saw in the cinema only yesterday, and that's The Substance, which is the second film by female French director Coralie Fargeat, after her first film, which was Revenge, I believe, which I haven't seen. So I kind of went into this really blind. I know there's been a lot of hype around it, and I think it's given off vibes of a kind of sleeper hit because like I say, the hype's building for it. I think a lot of people that are seeing it are having a lot of favourable and positive reactions, or at least they're having a sense of reaction to this movie. So, yeah, with that, let's get right into it and talk about it. I kind of want to do a kind of review of the film and a bit of analysis and discuss with you guys because I think it's actually a film that's worthy of said analysis. So, it's, if I were to describe this, obviously it's a horror film, and it's a great way to kick off the Halloween season. I know we're not in October yet, but why not get started early, right? Halloween only rolls around once a year. And I don't know about yourselves, but for me, I like to watch quite a few horror films during the month of October. And this is certainly a very great start to it because this is probably one of way more interesting. I mean, we're going through a resurgent period in horror at the moment with modern horror. And I'd say this is actually one of the more interesting and remarkable films to come out of the horror boom that we've seen the last 10 years or so, I think. So The Substance is a film which, like I say, it's a horror, more probably appropriately a kind of body horror, and some elements of kind of satire, because this film does have elements of dark humour in it, as well as a lot of gross out moments. I think it will test a lot of audiences. It's going to be a good litmus test for their stomachs. And I have seen reports of some people walking out on a lot of screenings. I mean, incidentally, actually, so I went to see it yesterday with my brother. There was about 9 or 10 of us total in the screening, if that. And no one walked out. There was both males, females, different ages, and none of us walked out. So we all managed to stay there throughout. And I think the reaction was kind of muted afterward, in the sense of a lot of us, I think, were comprehending what we just saw, because it's a film which is pretty depraved and then some. It gets progressively more and more depraved, in a good way, I think, by the way, when I say that. That's not a knock. So The Substance is a film about an aging actress who's just about to turn 50, played by Demi Moore, named Elizabeth Sparkle, who's she's obviously a successful actress, because we see from the outset that she gets a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame that's done in this kind of bird's eye view kind of time-lapse sequence, in which we see the star being put down on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And then we see over time how the star not only just literally fades, in the sense that it gets weathered and cracked and worn down from just time and weather and so on and so forth, but we see how the perception towards that star image literally changes over time, in which people are first seen photographing with it, recognizing it, and then over time people start walking over it, or people drop their food all over it and kind of smear and smudge it in and walk over it some more, or we see the street sweepers go over it. So this straight away is a very, very apt metaphor for the kind of the aging process of said protagonist, the eponymous protagonist in the film, Elizabeth Sparkle. Like I say, who's played by Demi Moore here. Demi Moore actually she's older than 50 years old. She's actually, I believe 62. But she's playing a 50-year-old here in what is, I think, a very courageous performance, because given the nature of the film, which is about kind of both female and male perceptions of kind of aging, female aging and body image, she's putting her body out there in both senses of the word, because there's a lot of nudity in this film. Not really sexualized nudity. The 18 is more in regards to the amount of gore that's in this film. But she's putting her body out there and letting us kind of see it warts and all, if you like, and subjecting it almost to thematic analysis of the thesis of the film itself that it's presenting. And so it takes an actor with a kind of, that's pretty kind of, pretty selfless and bold to do that, I think, because they have to acknowledge their own position of aging. Remember, Demi Moore is someone that was seen as a great beauty herself. It's great casting, because she was seen as a kind of great beauty herself in the 90s. Hasn't had many substantial roles since, and this is, I think, both a revelatory role and performance for her, because it is really good casting. And someone who herself, let's be honest, has had plastic surgery. So she's, if we're going to talk about the pressures on female body image, which is referred to as a persistent theme throughout this film, then we would argue that Demi Moore is someone who has succumbed to said pressures. So that's really, really interesting that Demi Moore's casting here, and I think she's fabulous in the film. And like I say, she plays the lead, Elizabeth Sparkle, who is seen when we have that kind of after that kind of time that sequence is over of the Hollywood star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. We're seeing present day that she's now doing fitness videos, which for anyone who kind of knows, fitness videos is the kind of is the great signifier of the, it's the thing that Z-list celebs do, right? Particularly post Christmas in that kind of January DVD release thing, which quickly gets consigned to the DVD bargain bins and consigned to history, because after that fad, no one buys them, right? In which celebrities kind of sell their fitness regime, and most of the time their fitness regime, by the way, is courtesy of their kind of their nutritionists and their surgeons, more so than, for example, the workouts that they are advocating in said workout or DVD release. So, there's a kind of that sense of kind of hollowness to her life immediately from, and immediately conveys her sense of her sense and placement in where she is in life at the moment. But nonetheless, we get the sense that she's obviously been incredibly materially successful. She's got a lovely place. She's had a great career. Objectively speaking, looks great for her age. Seems popular and well liked. However, the film goes at great lengths straight away to tell us that she is someone who doesn't seem to have anyone close in her life, friends, family, a partner, anything, children of her own. Almost like she's led a life of success. That her success is these supposed shortcomings or markers of success in terms of her personal life, in terms of relationships, are precisely because of her success, as if they're sacrifices, actually, which is an interesting thing to know, I think. But it's also conveyed formally. A lot of the time she's shot in the film at the end of these long corridors that also almost remind me of the kind of psychogeography of something like The Shining, in which corridors are used as like haunting spaces, but also to kind of obviously accentuate the loneliness and isolation, but also puts in the mind of the fragmented mind of the protagonist. In that case, Jack Torrance, but in this case, Elizabeth. So hallways and corridors, particularly their colours and their patterns, are very reminiscent of The Shining here. And we see that early on. And we see that she's kind of, it's soon to be her 50th birthday, and she gets rewarded by essentially being fired off her own fitness show by the producer, who's played with great relish by Dennis Quaid, in a kind of real slimy, sleazy role. And so she's fired from that, and then so her neuroses regarding her body image and her insecurities worsen to the point where it's the cause of a car accident that she's in. Remarkably, she gets away from this car accident, this twisted, mangled metal, relatively unscathed, right? Not only does she live, but she doesn't really have any major injuries, pardon me. While she's in the hospital, she is given this USB stick with a piece of paper by kind of one of the doctors, who says you're a perfect candidate for this, essentially, whilst checking her back, and gives her this USB, a piece of paper that says, "It changed my life." She goes home, puts the USB in the television, and proceeds to watch this kind of trailer for the thing called The Substance. She's not convinced at first, but she then soon is, and actually orders what is this kit of The Substance, which, by the way, this review has spoilers. If you wish to watch the film first, if you haven't seen it, tune out here, because I will be talking about it, because I want to talk about the themes and some of the issues that the film raises, a bit of analysis. But suffice to say, the substance that she takes doesn't go well. It does the created intended effect, which essentially creates not a clone, but like an idealized alternative version of her younger self, which is born out of her back. Okay, so there's like a birthing sequence here that's reminiscent of kind of something like Gross Out, like an American Werewolf in London. And of course, another huge staple of this in regards to metamorphosis is David Cronenberg's The Fly, which is probably the most evident and heavily referenced film throughout in terms of inspiration. But this idealized figure, the alternative younger self, Sue, who's played by Margaret Qualley, is born out of her. And the only two rules of this is essentially that the one is unconscious. Whichever one is conscious, the other one's unconscious for 7 days. They must be fed every day for 7 days. At 7 days, you must change back, and then you're the one to be unconscious. So it switches between the older Elizabeth and the younger Sue, essentially, okay? And of course, this being a horror, those things don't go to plan, because what happens, of course, is the younger one gets a taste for the success and the life that she has, and as a result, wants to extend those days more and more, with horrific consequences in regards to the aging of Elizabeth's body. And so that's where the body horror grotesquerie ensues. Like I say, huge emphasis and indebtedness to The Fly here, Cronenberg's 86 version, in terms of the metamorphosis and the gross out effects. Yeah, you're in for a kind of gross out ride when early on in the film, even images of people eating are disgusting. And credit to the sound department here, because the sound design on this is terrific, as is the effects, which are really reminiscent of kind of Rob Bottin's 80s and 90s special effects, which were obviously outstanding for the time, and they kind of really hark back to those kind of prosthetics and physical effects, which is really refreshing and nice to see. And like I say, even the images of someone, the Dennis Quaid's producer eating the shrimp at the beginning is made out to be disgusting. This is a film that really kind of emphasizes abject horror, which is essentially the idea of, the innate disgust we feel when things that are meant to be inside our bodies present themselves outside, so such as bodily fluids, whether that's sexual or blood or pus, those kinds of elements of disgust that is brought about by us kind of irrationally, are because of the kind of the obliteration of borders, that being inside and outside. So this is a horror of the abject in a great sense, like all great body horrors are. And like I say, it will be a real stomach test for audiences. I think, so what this film is primarily about is, and this is where I think the film really shines for me, is essentially it is a kind of critique or exploration of the pressures that are put upon women, not just by men, but social expectations via men and also women, on their own, basically on the social expectations by a society that judges a woman's worth in relation to her body image. And her worth is directly tied to her body image, essentially. And what are the material consequences of that in the psyche of the protagonist, Elizabeth, or women in general, if we were to take her as a kind of signifier for women in society, particularly high class society. Speaking of high class society, another reference here is Brian Yuzna's Society, the film from '89, I believe, in terms of its kind of the darkly comic satirical elements and observations of high society, and also, of course, the kind of gross out body horror elements that is like a kind of carnival of the grotesque that happens at the end of society, is replicated here, and then some, by the way. And I think so. The film does a great job in showing, yes, it's both male, what men see, but it's also what the pressures that women put upon themselves in creating neuroses to live up to the idealized images of what society wants them to be. And in that sense, Elizabeth in this film is a very tragic figure, which recalls the kind of, again, other horrors such as, or stories such as, Hunchback of Notre Dame or Elephant Man in particular, in which their victimization is one which is innately tied to social value and expectations and projections that are put upon them, which they then internalize. Because it's important to note here that her younger self is not a clone, not in the strict sense. She is her ego ideal of what she would like to look like in the present, but as a younger person. Okay, that's how they exist as two different people. Now, there is a potential issue here in terms of the plot because of that, which namely is that because they each have their own consciousness, what does Elizabeth get out of this deal with the substance? Because she can't live vicariously through the consciousness of her younger self or younger alternative because she's asleep. And we know this because each time they wake up, they're just in the kind of comic elements of the film, they're both disgusted by the state of that they've left the apartment in. Because what happens is, what we see is not just a physical deterioration throughout the film of Elizabeth's character, but also a mental deterioration. For me, those are the most affecting parts of the film, actually, in the sense it really conveys the sense of what these weight of expectations, particularly when in terms of social comparison, which is why it's actually really, really relevant film in the age of social media, what kind of social comparison does. The idea of comparison being the thief of joy, yeah? In which when she compares herself to the ideal that now exists, her self-esteem only lowers. There's the most heartbreaking and saddening scene of the film is when her confidence is now so low that she has to pluck up the courage to go accept a date that is presented, but a date opportunity that's presented earlier in the film that let's say her prime self, her younger self, would have easily dismissed. He wouldn't have been in her league, as it were. Okay, because he's not necessarily the most traditionally attractive looking person. She can't even remember who he is. But at this point, she's plucking up the courage to ring up and say yes to the date. That's how low her confidence is. And then we see her getting ready in front of the mirror over and over and over again, trying to perfect her makeup. And she can't do it. She just can't, because every time she comes out, she has that massive panoramic view of kind of the city of Los Angeles in her Beverly Hills home. And there's a massive billboard of Sue. And she quickly looks at her, feels inadequate, goes back and adjusts and reapplies makeup to the point where she doesn't even go out on the date. And it cuts to a shot of her isolated and lonely. You know, the curtains are shut in the darkness on the end of the bed, just slumped over. And it's a really, really powerful moment. And it shows how mental health is directly tied to, a lot of the times, the social weight and expectation of others that we then unfortunately internalize, and how our worth is directly correlated to those things. And that's where I think the film carries the most value. Where I think the film suffers a little bit is, I think it tries to be both a critique of those things and then also a critique of kind of the entertainment industry and show business, which I think comes off a bit, I don't want to say hokey, but it doesn't. It's specious in comparison. It doesn't have the same weight and conviction, and kind of the depiction of show business, I think, never really convinces in a kind of modernized sense. It feels a bit cabaret Las Vegas, sleazy in a way that doesn't quite justify the desire of the characters to want to do those things necessarily. And I just think the depiction itself is not very convincing. So I think it falters there, and that's not as strong as, say, its critique of, say, the perceptions of female body image and how that's tied to aging, which I think is fantastic. And like I say, this film is very, very cine literate. It has loads and loads of references to films of the past, some of which I've already mentioned. I think it's some that have barely been mentioned, but probably kind of, and they are weird films to mention. I think one, spoilers here if you haven't seen the film Fight Club, but spoilers here if you might want to stop if you haven't, is the idea of kind of like the alternative self or the other fighting, the two battling each other, is, especially in the one scene where they're fighting in the apartment, is very reminiscent of Fight Club, where Norton's beating himself up in the office, as it were, or is he, as it turns out. Well, he is, but it's presented to us in a different way later on in the film. And I think a film that hasn't been mentioned a lot, actually, that I think deserves to get mentioned, is Nicholas Ray's Bigger Than Life, which is a film from '56, which is about a professor, a teacher, played by James Mason, who takes this new tablet which increases, from what I can remember, like increases your attention, increases your performance, but both his personal and private life and his professional life, begin to suffer with the unintended consequences of that. That's really central to this, I think, and particularly in how it's tied to the social expectations at the time, and public perception, because Bigger Than Life is really a kind of critique of 50s consumerist conservatism, really. And another one, which I think this reference is the most brilliant in the film, is Vertigo. The use of the romance music, in which, when Elizabeth, at her kind of most removed from herself, shall we say, in terms of her transformation, her metamorphosis, is trying to get ready to this big New Year's performance that she's going to do, and the music plays from Vertigo, and that is if you, like I say, if you want to know what the film is about, really in a nutshell, that's it, because essentially Vertigo is about essentially the almost like the impossibility of male desire via the fetishization of an idealized figure that you can never have or obtain because it exists only in your mind. Here, this is about Elizabeth's perfect idealized self, which again is impossible to attain, but it's herself. It's not being projected onto another, although it is manifested bodily in another, but again, she can never be that other person. And that's the true tragedy of the film, the tragic predicament. So it really is a kind of, because I've seen some critiques of this which say, it's not maybe that feminist or that powerful as a feminist critique, because again, Elizabeth is essentially a victim throughout the film. But I think that's where it is powerful, is the sense that the tragedy of her predicament is in her internalizing the social expectations of others, and therefore she develops these neuroses as a consequence of that, and the terrible consequences that then follow, as manifested, of course, through the lens of body horror. So I actually think it's an excellent film. Actually, I think it's really, really interesting. I can't wait to actually when it comes out, because I think this will be a sleeper hit. Like I say, this was being shown the same day as around the same time there was a showing of James McAvoy's horror, right, Speak No Evil, which had more people seeing that film. But I think over time, just by word of mouth, even in the next few weeks, this will actually become really successful and get a lot more viewings. And I hope it extends its runtime here in certainly in the UK anyway, because I think it kind of deserves it. And I think, like I say, Demi Moore deserves a lot of plaudits for her performance. Performances all around terrific, as is the sound design. Cinematography is fantastic. It wears, like I say, it's never overwrought with the amount of cinematic illusions and influences that it bears. It wears them on its sleeve really, really well. I think the film is slightly over long. 140 minutes is, I think, slightly too long for this film. You could have 10-15 minutes cut off. But nonetheless, when you're watching it, it rolls along. I couldn't believe it was 140 minutes, actually. So it runs along very, very nicely. But nonetheless, I think you get the point of the film about halfway through. It's been hammered home. And so therefore, you could cut out some of the runtime on the basis of that. I think it does hammer home its point from that point. Or from that standpoint, I should say. But I think it's, like I say, a very, very entertaining film. Really, really kind of actually refreshing that, it takes a film that's obviously so indebted to cinema of the past, but does something new with those things in new and exciting ways, which is what the best genre films should do, right? Repetition plus difference. So if you haven't seen this film, wow. Well, I hope you do now, and I hope I haven't spoiled it too much, but I did warn you. But if you have, I would love to know what you guys think of this. Did you see any walkouts? Were you one to walk out? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you see any problems with it? Like I say, I have a couple of issues with it in regards to, I think it's dual. It tries to take off, I think, bites off more than it can chew in regards to the critique of show business and the entertainment industry. I think it's semi-successful in doing those things, but not wholly successful. And I think you could argue in terms of narrative plausibility, in terms of the psychological motivations of Demi Moore's character, Elizabeth. She doesn't quite get anything out of that arrangement if their consciences are not shared. So there is that element to it as well that I think narrative plausibility doesn't make too much sense. Nonetheless, I mean, it won best screenplay at Cannes, and I can see why for good reason, just because of its inventiveness, I think, in terms of into the canon of the horror genre. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Did you like the film? Were you grossed out by it? I like I say, I think you do need to have a strong stomach for this. But if you can stick with it, I think it's a very, very rewarding film and kind of emotionally affecting too, like I say. I think it has a lot to say about the times that we live in regards to how we perceive the worth of particularly women. Yeah, let me know what you guys think. And as always, if you like this video and you want to see more contemporary reviews, as well as, of course, I do reviews of films from the past, please do like and subscribe, share the video if you like, and let me know your thoughts. And as always, I will see you on the next one. Take care.